In an earlier video, we installed Autoscan Terminal and set up an automated login. Now that we've done that once, we can pick up that configuration and deploy it within the enterprise so that anyone who needs access can securely get access on their own workstation. So the goals for the deployment are, we're going to take our existing single computer deployment and make it available to the enterprise users. We want to ensure that only those users and computers that should have access can get access. We want to ensure the keys and the configuration are managed centrally and not stored on the client computers. And we want to make it seamless for the users. So the way we're going to do that is to create an IIS website, and that will allow us to host the keys and configuration centrally. We'll enable and require TLS. We'll create folders for the keys, trust, and configuration. And then we'll restrict access using Active Directory groups. We can then move the keys and configuration from the client computer to the website. And then we can remove the credentials from the client and reconfigure it to use the website instead. So let's look at where we are. So we currently have this automated session in Medipath Sim that lets us log on just this computer to get a secure connection to Medipath. Remembering, just this is a simulator, so normally the screen would stop at the user password there and allow the user to put the password in. But again, this is just a text file that displays what you would see in the Medipath screen, so it's not a real Medipath. So let's clear that up. So what did we have to do to get here? Just for a recap, if we have a look in our local computer's SSH folder, what we have is this file here, which is known hosts. We also have one called unknown hosts as well, which we don't need to carry through. That's only for configuration purposes. And we also have this private key here. These other two files are files we generated using PowerShell, which is also a private and public key, but we didn't end up using those. So let's get rid of those as they're not helping us. The other thing we have, of course, is the configuration for Autoscan Terminal, which we can always access using Alt backtick. And so that's the configuration file. So what we plan to do is take these configuration files from this computer and store them inside a web host, which will, when you've authenticated using your Windows credentials, allow you to access the Medipath server pretty much seamlessly. So let's get that underway. Let's open up Internet Information Service Manager, IIS. Okay, there we are. And this is a brand new installation. Never had a site before. So the first thing we have to do is, at the root level, we need to create a server certificate because we must use SSH. Now this is not a enterprise version of Windows, so we won't be able to see all the Active Directory things that we'd normally see. Most of the things will translate perfectly well. So first thing is we need to create a server certificate. So if we do create self-signed certificate here, and we set the friendly name for the certificate, which will be, wow, laptop with a, maybe I should have picked a more friendly name, SGQDKAR7. Okay, and we want to store that in the web hosting certificate. Okay, so that's created our certificate now, and then we need to go set the bindings for the website. Go to bindings, and we say, yes, we've got HTTP, but in fact we want HTTPS as well on all ports. And we don't need the host name thing in this configuration, but we can use this certificate here we just created. Okay, so now we've got port 443. Now technically we don't want HTTP, but that's always enabled by default in the default configuration, default website. So we will be able to restrict that. So now that we've got that working, if I use my browser and go to our local host, HTTPS laptop SGQDKAR7. Wow. So we can see that's now working, and we've got this certificate here. So that's the one we just looked at. Connection is secure, and if you look at the certificate, it's the one we just created in IIS. Now IIS has added that to our list of allowed certificates, so we don't need to do anything with the certificate manager. Ideally, we'd actually use a enterprise certificate generated within the domain, so all of the domain computers actually have that certificate, root certificate for that installed, so it won't give us any problems. Okay, so that's a good start. Next, we need to create a virtual directory to keep our private information in. So I'm just going to add a virtual directory. Now if we look back at our configuration file again, we can see that the default kind of place is a folder called SSH. So so this one here, we set it, but we always say SSH and then keys. So I think we should probably use that convention. So our alias is SSH, and the physical path, we will create a new folder which we would protect using file access permissions, whatever is appropriate for the domain. And I'm just going to put them, because I've got an Autoscan installed in this machine, like just for tidiness, I'm going to create it in there. I'm going to make a new folder called SSH inside of the Autoscan folder. Okay. Obviously we can put that anywhere we want in truth. So now that we've got that, we can actually now configure the access to that folder. So we've got the folder created, but right now anybody can access it. So I want to turn on the authentication, and so these are the two types of authentication I have enabled. Now neither of those are actually appropriate, so I'm going to disable this one, and I need to go add the Windows authentication type into this folder, but I haven't got that installed yet, so bear with me. As it turns out, this computer, being a laptop, actually doesn't have the Windows authentication enabled. I haven't installed that. So I'll just show you what that looks like on another computer where it is installed. So again, this is same kind of configuration with the SSH folder. The authentication, you'll notice that all of the authentications are turned off except Windows authentication. So that's how we'd ideally want to do it. Now, if I just show you a bit more on this computer here, we have this config and keys, and so for the purposes of this demo, I'll go show you how to configure that. We just have to assume for this moment that the Windows authentication is turned on. So let us go back to that. I'll come back to here. So in this folder, which we said was on the Autoscan NG folder, now we have this SSH folder inside there. What we want to do is make a new folder, one for keys and one for config. And so obviously the keys, we want to put the keys from our SSH folder, our .sh folder, that one, and also our known hosts as well. Oh, sorry, that one and that one. We want to bring those and put them into our SSH keys folder on the web server. So now hosts and Medipath SIM private key is protected by our web server's authentication, and we just need to then add our configuration file into the config. So where do we get our configuration file from? Well, you can just open this up and then save as. So remembering how we got to here, we ran Autoscan Terminal, logged in, and we did alt backtick which will open the config file. So now we can just save as into our, now obviously we need to save this onto the server folder, but we can go to this PC, the Autoscan NG SSH folder, and into the config folder, Autoscan Terminal INF. Now, but we do, that's the default name for the application, but we do actually want to call this something that makes a bit more sense. So we can call that, perhaps if we had Medipath, Medipath backup, Medipath test server 1, something like that, we'd have a different configuration here. So let's just call this one Medipath sim.inf and save that. Okay, so now we've got that configuration on the server. Okay, so let's close that up, and we can close that up. And now if we look at our content view here, we should refresh, and we should have our config in here, and we have our 2 keys. Okay, and we need to, because this ID RSA is not a recognized file extension in IIS, we need to go add that to the request filtering to allow that to be returned. Text is okay, and INF I think is also okay. We may need to add that. We'll check that in a second. We may need to add them all. I'm not quite sure about the configuration. So we'll go to this level, back to feature view, request filtering, and we need to add. So let's add the text one. .txt is allowed. Allow file extension dot ID underscore RSA is also allowed, and we also need .inf to be allowed. Okay, so now if we open our browser and go to HTTPS laptop one, yes, that's the one we want, SSH keys, and we want known hosts and IIS. Let's see if we can get both of those files. Now again, I normally need Windows authentication, but again, as I said, this computer doesn't support that without some extra configuration. So I'll add this in, keys, and we should be able to get known hosts.txt, and it says it's unauthorized. Well, that's kind of good. So that's okay. So we'll just go back to our site configuration, and because we've disabled the authentication, and we need to enable, we'll just enable anonymous, but again remembering you need to add only Windows authentication on the domain. So now if we refresh that, and we can now get the file, which is good, known.text, and we also need to get this one here, medipath@medipath_sim.id_rsa, and it says not found, so I've clearly spelled that wrong. Okay, and the problem is, now the page actually tells us what the problem is. The configuration is there, that's correct, but it doesn't have a proper handler. So the text one worked fine, but we need to turn on the MIME mapping for that particular file type. And again, so we need to go back to the configuration, go to MIME types, and if we look down this list here, obviously that one is not there. So if I add file name extension and we put .id_rsa, and the MIME type for that would be the same as a text file, although we can just do the same as the binary one here. So we do application octet stream, that will be. Okay, I've spelled it wrong. Just need to fix that up, and octet dash stream. So same as these other various ones here, octet stream. So now we go back to our browser and try that one again. it has now downloaded that. So if we'd done text, it would have just dumped it onto the screen, but I think this is probably better. So she downloaded the file for us. And if we open this with Notepad++, we can see that we did in fact get the key. So that is good also. Let's close that up. And so even though the message was saying it didn't get it, that was just a message. And we then test the last file, which is in config. And that file is called MediPath_.inf. Now we did see INF was in the mappings before, so let's MediPath sim.inf. Okay, same story. So that did in fact download again. It was just that message that we get when we get streams. There's no visual cue that it's actually working. So to confirm, we'll look in our downloads folder. We should see MediPath sim.inf is there. Okay, so we just needed to test that was working in our browser. We don't actually need those to be on the computer at all. So now that IIS is working and we can see that we've got the browser returning the pages, that should be enough now to reconfigure our Autoscan terminal to use secure method instead. So use a remotely secured method. So the best way to do this is let's run Autoscan Terminal, and we go to the config, out backtick, and what is important is we need to turn on this feature here, which is the SSH key. So we won't change anything else, we'll just change that first thing. So first we just need to put in the correct name for the host. So that's where we go to, and we'll replace that, and it is keys, so we just replace that section. So now that we have that configured, we'll save that and close that up, and we'll just see if everything starts okay. And it does. So we haven't really changed anything just yet, but what we should be able to do now is if we go to our SSH folder for this particular user, we should now be able to take away these two files. So the Medipath RSA and the known host, we should be able to take those away now. So the computer doesn't have, well, this user doesn't, a Windows user doesn't have that configuration anymore. And close, and if I start it up now, it should still work, which it does. And so we know that it has loaded the certificate from the web server, and the test would be if we temporarily close that up. So if we went to the web server folder, which is not one, if we go to Autoscan SSH folder, and we just temporarily take away one of those key files, like known hosts, that should break it, and that will be a good confirmation that we're actually using the configuration from the web server, which it does. Okay, so very good confirmation. We'll put that one back. And that should work again, which it does. And so now that we've got the keys working, we want the configuration to also work. So we can go to the configuration file, and that's what this one here is. But of course, we're now getting that configuration from the server, so we need to go edit this one and also set this setting here. And on the client side, we actually want this configuration here so it can come to the server. So we will replace this bit here. SSH twice. Okay, so now that, and we need to turn that on. We won't need this bit of the configuration and this message about zero. We don't really need either. So if we get rid of that, and now we go back to our client configuration. That'll do a tick. The only thing we really need is this line, and pretty much all the rest can go. So if we replace that with this one here, we've got that config path.inf. We don't need any of that, and we don't need any of that. And that now should just point to the configuration on the server, and that means that the client computer now has no configuration whatsoever. It has just got the Autoscan terminal, and the configuration file is just a URL. Just to confirm, we go back to this one, it just says go get the configuration from here, which is our secured centralized enterprise location. And that is it for this particular video. We'll join you on the next one.